Hi, everyone, and welcome to DC FanDome. My name's Evan Narcissus. I'm a writer who's been a journalist, a critic, and now I'm a creator of comics. I'm here because we're going to talk about the other history of the DC universe, which is a 5-issue miniseries that will start coming out this November. I'm joined by the creators of the book, award-winning screenwriter and author John Ridley.
Hey, Evan, how you doing?
And superstar artist Giuseppe Camuncoli, also known as Camo.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
Guys, thanks so much for joining me.
And a quick hello to all the fans out there. I hope you're enjoying DC FanDome, and wherever you are around the world, I hope you're doing well, staying healthy, and just remember we're all in this together.
Now, this book is going to focus on characters of color and characters from marginalized backgrounds in the DC universe. It features Black Lightning, Mal and Karen Duncan from the Teen Titans, Katana from The Outsiders, Renee Montoya as the Question, and ends up with Jefferson Pierce's daughter, Thunder. John, tell us a little bit about the book.
You know, it's weird to be sitting here now talking about this project at all, because when we started the project, I had not written graphic novels in 10 years. I'd come back to DC. They were excited about re-engaging on a series that I'd done called The American Way. And, you know, to their credit, for them, it wasn't just, hey, let's have John do this one shot and move on. They really were interested in bringing me on as a writer. And they said, look, we want to do The American Way, but we want to give you a deal for another book. We'll figure that other book out later. And as we were sitting around pitching ideas and talking about things, one of the things that I brought up to DC was there was a series years ago after one of the Crisis on Infinite Earths, the original one. There was a book that went along with it called The History of the DC Universe. And it was absolutely, to me, amazing because it treated the DC Universe like a real, true timeline, like it was real history. And there was something very mature about that. There was something very thoughtful about that. When we were talking about books potentially that I could do, one of the things that I brought up was the concept of looking at the DC Universe through the prism of individuals who are outside of the prevailing culture, who were there every step of the way, but maybe they weren't central to many of these stories. Maybe they weren't at the heart of these stories, but they had a different perspective on events that happened in the DC universe, but treating it like it was real and treating it like it was history.
To start with Black Lightning, does that mean we're starting in the 1970s?
Yeah, we are starting in the 1970s. You know, Black Lightning hit the scene about 76, 77. So for me, when Black Lightning hit the scene, I mean, it was literally and figuratively like this thunderbolt. I mean, here's this character of color who looks like me. He's a teacher, the way my mother was a teacher. So for me, that was really the beginning of seeing characters that I could really relate to on a whole other level.
But talk about the other characters. Why are they the right mix for this story?
The second book is going to be Mal and Karen, because I was a Teen Titans fan. I honestly never thought Mal was used very well, within the Teen Titans. But, Karen, I thought was used actually pretty well. She was smart, she was sharp, she was sophisticated. She was kind of the hidden figures character way before many of us, including myself, even knew about these women who were working in NASA. And I thought it was very important to show young people of color who were committed to each other, who had a relationship, who worked at making a relationship work.
How do the other characters move us through the decades?
After that, we moved to Katana. She is in the mid-1980s, at a time where so many Americans were so fearful of the Japanese and thought that they were going to take over this country. And they were all the tropes that you hear about Asians. They're inscrutable and they, are emotionless. And what was it like for a woman, a female character, who was a Japanese national, being brought to America by Batman and really having to navigate a world where, if people don't know who Vincent Chin was, you're going to get a lesson. If people who don't know what Executive Order 9066 was, you're going to get a lesson. And I think that was very important to put in there. Then we go on to Renee Montoya. We're in the 90s. This is a character that came out of the Batman, the animated series, who started as a side character and became very essential in the Batman universe, but she's a Latina. She's openly gay. She's an alcoholic. She struggles. She's a police officer looking at the world where, those issues of police, of society, of race and orientation, I mean, look, they are not unfortunately going away. But I think it is important to tell these stories from the perspective of officers and not just say it's not one or the other. You're either a person of color or you're a cop. Sometimes you've got to walk both of those lines. And then winding up in the late 90s and the early 2000s with Anissa Pierce. And I thought that was very important to bookend that with a female character, a female of color, a female who is from the LGBTQ community, but also who has to carry this mantle of her father. And just as a father myself, you want to engineer appropriate outcomes for your kids, but young people are their own people. And we see it now with the whole okay boomer. And the truth is, they're right. We may have tried, tried to make a better world, but we certainly have not done that. So what happens for that next generation where they are beholden to the past in some ways, but they've got to make their own way? So for me, in laying out those books, that was the arc that made it feel like individually, book by book, you could pick up any of them and have a full, complete story. But if you look at them as a real, true historical timeline with real events, with events from the DC universe, there is going to be a real satisfaction for every fan who wants to pick up these stories, because you will remember events. There's plenty of action, there's plenty of storytelling. But hey, you know me, Evan, there's going to be a few lessons along the way.
Camo, I want to throw it to you now. How did you get involved with the project? What excited you about it?
I got involved with the project thanks to Jim Lee, a longtime friend of mine. I was visiting the DC offices in 2018, I think. And I had lunch with Jim and just thinking about maybe going back to DC, which is where I started, because my first job for the American market was Swamp Thing, written by Brian K. Vaughan. And he was like, look, we have this project written by John Ridley. I was like, oh. And I remember when it was announced, and I thought, well, that was the main reason why I wanted to do it, because a project this big, with such a terrific importance, and that was 2018, not even talking about what it means today, 2 years afterwards. And that was something that really got me excited.
What's the thing that most amazed you or maybe that you've learned as you've been proceeding along with bringing this project visually along?
I discovered so many things on the way to, doing pages. I was blown away by the story. I think that as much credit as an artist can get, not every story is the same. And John made it all easy, because his words and the images that he evoked in my mind were so powerful, so intense, that made my job so easy to visualize and to come up with strong imagery. I was not really familiar about these characters. I drew, I think, Katana in a short story for Suicide Squad. I think I drew Renee Montoya during 52, but so much of the other things, especially, I knew Bumblebee, but I didn't know anything about Mal, so it was like a surprise. What I really like about comics, 20 years after, starting professionally, is a surprise, doing new things, working with new creators, and that's what keeps this job of ours, special, at least to me. And I thought that this book was something special, and probably one of the most ambitious things I've ever worked on. I learned so many lessons because I was not familiar with so many episodes of real life and real history. That thing alone was worth the price, for me.
From the characters that are appearing in the series, did you reimagine anybody's look or redesigns anybody?
Not really. I'm actually always trying to be in line with what has been done before, especially with a book like this. I always ask for references, because since I'm not super familiar with these characters, I want to make sure that every panel I draw, every costume that I draw is spot on. And so I'm trying to be as faithful as possible to the source material, because in the end, what John did and built is a very organic history. Set in real life, real time, but also organic to the whole DC continuum. And my job, aside from trying to draw beautiful images, is to make readers feel like these all happen in real time in the DCU and in our world. That was my thing. So far, I think I have had only a few things that I reimagined or recreated, but I'm fine with that. Actually, it's been a blast to just have to reimagine and redraw all these iconic moments in the DC history.
John, What is it specifically about Camel's art that you feel like really works for the story that you guys are trying to tell together?
More than anything, Camel has really brought an emotional velocity to the storytelling, to the visual storytelling. And I mean, this project, it was announced, and then once I started, I realized there was such an education that I needed. Education in terms of some of these characters that I thought I knew, but you're talking about stories that go back, 35 years. There was an education in terms of the fact that, yes, I'm Black, but I'm not a woman. I'm not from the LGBTQ community. I was born in America. I wasn't born in another country. And I didn't want to go into it and not allow for at least some other people to weigh in and make sure that, I wasn't making assumptions. I wasn't saying things or doing things that were just patently wrong or stupid or stereotypical in and of themselves. So there was this long process to even get the book on the page where everybody felt like we were being honorific to the history of the DC universe, to the emotions that we were putting into the book, and then getting to the point where we started looking the art and saying, it needs more flow. It needs to be something that is not your typical graphic novel, but at the same time is not staid, is not just, a pure art book. And so, here's Camo, who's halfway around the world. As he says, some of these characters he's not familiar with. And I say this very sincerely, when the art started coming back, there's just this relief and just this feeling that you have been brought together with somebody who not only gets it, but really puts their own spin on it. You want someone who's going to elevate what's there. And very sincerely, when you see what Camo has done, it really is this very unique blend of things that feel like they are like literally pulled from these historic moments. There are moments that Camo literally took things that are historic and put them in the book. And then there are other things that are new, particularly in Renee Montoya's book. There was an opportunity to really bring in some elements that did not exist previously, but making sure they felt like they were part and parcel of our history. I just sit back and go, okay, you just do what you have to do. It was very, very special. And he really delivered, and I deeply appreciate that. Because as much as comic books are certainly about the text, let's face it, fans love the visuals. They love going to a world that they've never seen before, even if that is a real world. Camo, you nailed it.
It's been a pleasure and a joy working on this book. The scope of the story is something that I've probably never done before, because it goes from very intimate moments in the personal story and the life of these characters. Maybe that was the tricky part on paper, but at the same time, you made it so easy for me to get it. And I was not familiar at all with Mal Duncan. I was more familiar with Bumblebee, especially now that Bob is like super familiar with the character Teen Titans Go, which is a show that I myself adore, and also DC Superhero Girls, to see the exchanges between the two characters in that issue. But every issue in the miniseries, in the graphic novel that will be collected is amazing. But if you get the whole thing, it's gonna be a blast.
I remember one of the things that struck out to me as a longtime DC fan is that it was announced with Jon Stewart, but he's not in the book. What changed between the time that it was announced and as you were working on it?
There was an event, I guess it was 3 years ago. It was called DC in DC. It was concurrent with the launch of Black Lightning on the CW. They invited me down to talk about it. I was in New York at that time. I was on a train to DC, and they said, hey, we're going to announce this series. And I said, well, that's great, but I don't really know what this series is yet. Emotionally, I know what I hope it's going to be, but I don't know what characters are going to be in it. So, naturally, there were characters that you gravitate towards, like Jon Stewart. Certainly like Black Lightning, but at that time, I really didn't know where everything was going to fit in. So there were characters that we talked about, and I don't want to say that Jon Stewart is not in this series, but the way that he's woven into the story, the way that Jefferson Pierce and Jon Stewart look at the world, they're a little bit different. And that was very important for me in terms of the storytelling, because just because we're talking about individuals who are outside of the prevailing culture, as you know, Evan, we're not all monolithic. We don't see the world the same way. And so it was very important for me to try to set up these characters so that you could see the differences. You could see where they interacted in ways that were commiserate with each other, in ways where we see the world just as differently as anybody else.
Final thoughts from you, John, about why this story needs to be told now.
You know, it's weird, Evan, because I think this story, I know these stories would have been impactful 2 years ago, 3 years ago, if we could have brought them out right away. But you look at what's going on in the world, and for all of us, this need to continually engage with people who are not like us, people who are not in our silos, and understand our differences and understand our commonalities. We see that urgency play out right now. It was also really important for me to make sure that these stories were hopeful, that we as people are going to build to a better place. I never want to portray, certainly as a Black man, I don't want to portray people of color in our struggles always as having been victims. I certainly, as I was going into these other spaces, didn't want to portray other individuals as victims. So for me, beat by beat, moment by moment, from beginning to end, build stories of hope. That's what graphic novels ultimately are about. People that we can look up to, people who are truly heroic, not just because they have powers, but because they choose to do the right things. So to have these stories of hope, to have this incredible artwork, to have these stories that I think for fans, that, from moment to moment to go, oh, I remember this, I remember that, or things that they don't remember and can go back to their local comic book stores and say, oh, do you have those issues? Do you have these collected trades? To me, that's what's really exciting. It's a really unique story. It's a really unique arc of stories. And again, I just really have to praise, DC for allowing us, these 3 years, when other people were saying, oh, this book is never going to come out. Oh, they forgot about it. I'm regretful that in some ways it's coming out in the world that we live in right now. It's necessary more now than ever. It's going to be a beautiful book. It's going to be a powerful book. And again, I'm just so thankful to everyone at DC for giving us the time, the space, and the support to make this book and this series the best that it could possibly be.
John and Camo, thank you guys so much for taking time out from your busy schedules to be here on FanDome to talk about the book. For everybody out there watching, it's The Other History of the DC Universe, which will be out this November. That's it. Everybody out there, stay safe. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we see you again soon.